I'm going to make a series about witchcraft and some high level history about witchcraft and what it's been done and kind of what it's been through in the last several thousand years and to where it is today for warlocks and witches and people that are interested in just the subject alone. I think it's important to understand at least a very basic, fundamental understanding on how it even started, why it even started, and what it is today, and how it's been viewed and what's been done. Now, this is going to take a number of videos to do. Obviously, I don't want to make a 30-hour video, and I'm not trying to cover everything either. But I'm going to do this in video stages. Going back, I'm only going to go back about 4,000 years to the Sumerians, where witchcraft was very prevalent all throughout the Mediterranean and all over the Middle East, all over the East in general. It was quite prevalent, and witchcraft was viewed anything from, or even the Egyptians, but we'll get to that, from healing herbs and roots to make you feel better. That was sometimes considered witchcraft by some people, to people that actually would don out specific outfits or tried to mimic animals, or there was a very large range of different things. But throughout all of this time, one of the main things that stayed in common was the idea or thought of the goddess, and the goddess being the giver of life. Now, obviously, you can tell where this would come from, as women are the only human beings that can give birth to other human beings. So it's very logical to take the leap to that it's a goddess that provides life to everything else, which is what they believed. Now, about 4,000 years ago, the Sumerians also viewed the goddess, according to a lot of the Neolithic carvings and paintings that were found, and different historians had discovered in different writings and different things, that the goddess was primarily looked at first as a mother, clearly, because of the giving birth and different things, but she was also looked at as being multifaceted, having many faces, many forms, many ways, and could be interchangeable with a lot of things. Second, she was the giver of life, but she was also the plants and animals and different things like that the goddess gave life to everything. And then third, as a giver of life, she was also the one that would take everything away. So as you died, you had to have permission, basically, from the goddess to die. Now, through the next 1,500 years after that, and yes, I could probably make a 2-year video on everything through the 4,000 years up, but just as a preview is what this video would be, as an introduction, is all. Then she was also worshipped as the goddess, continuing through the Sumerians and into the Middle East, and she was considered the most dominant force there was. She was basically considered time, space, matter, what your body's made of, the air that you breathe, how long it took you to get from one place to another, all of the tools that you used, everything that made up every plant, every piece of food, She was basically considered everything in nature, which is why today we say Mother Nature. That's where all of that comes from. Uh, Throughout all of these thousands of years, she was just considered nature. She was everything, and there wasn't anything. As royalty, this was, of course, adopted into and brought into Egyptian culture, who also had other different gods and Horus and oh Lord, what Osiris and Isis and all of that, and the sun god, all of these developed along with it. But the goddess, as princesses and royalty and monarch, which was just about everything in that era. They were the princesses were considered as likeness of the goddess, the ruling goddess of basically everything that was alive, and a lot of things came from that. She was not necessarily treated that way as a goddess by everybody, certainly not her father, but was viewed as an image of the goddess by everybody. So very, 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 as regal as about you can get. And as the Egyptian pharaohs, they were considered themselves as living gods. So everything that they said, there was no higher authority. They controlled and ran everything. They were just living gods, and were direct descendants of the gods that ran the sun and ran the planet and the cycles and nature and everything else. And the goddess would have been his daughter. Without going into all of this and sounding like a Harvard school professor and coming up with all of these amazing names and terminologies, this is the basic, short and skinny. Feel free to investigate and fill in the gaps as you want. The animal I'm going to touch on in this video, and I'm going to try to touch on one animal in each one of these videos about witchcraft, is the cat. And the Egyptians worshipped the cat quite. The cat was the most magical animal. Cats they kept all of the dead in check. They kept all of the spirits where they were supposed to be. They protected the royalty. They protected the princess. They protected the kings. They protected the pharaohs. They protected everybody. Cats could see through any dimension. They could travel between dimensions. And there were hundreds and hundreds of mummified cats found throughout Egypt, in sacred burial places and in cemeteries that were specifically for cats, along with all mummified, and some of them encased in bronze and wooden, excuse me, of course, there's the burp, sarcophagus cases, very elaborately decorated, and I'm sure some are on display somewhere. You may be able to find it online, I'm sure. I have to stop saying, I hate saying that. There were also thousands of mummified mice that were also found. Now, they were typically put in sacks together, but it is believed that they were the food for the cats in the afterlife. So, this is how strongly these people believed in the goddess and the power of these animals, and what they could do as magical creatures. Now, as far as what the goddess was called, her name, of course, has changed throughout the ages, and all the way up to what she's referred to modern and I'm sure different people in different groups and different congregations of witches, if you will, have their own way. But in the beginning, the main name for her back in 4,000 years, actually we're about 6,000 years ago, her name was Nut. As that's not how you pronounce it, Nut or Nut. There were variants, but N-U-T is how the English would write it. Would be the closest that we could do. Then, of course, Nut gave birth to Isis. It was her daughter. And Isis, of course, brought Osiris back to life. Was her husband's brother or something like that. But he was killed, which, of course, as a god, he was killed. Explain that, but it's got to be somewhere. I just didn't do the research for that because I just don't care that much. And then in Sumeria, she was known as Inanna, and Eriskikal, probably saying that wrong. In Babylon, she's Ishtar, which is a name that's still used in the Middle East quite prevalently, not as a goddess, but in other terminology, but that's what they called her. They also called her Tiamat, which was the negative side. Tiamat would be the goddess that shows up to take your life. But different variations, different variants in all of that. In the Canaan, it's Ashtar or Astat, also Anut or Anat would be how you would call her. Wiccans today, as viewed as not negative witches, but a Wiccans being aligned with nature or viewed as, basically a peacekeepers and they're celebrators of life and creation, and not necessarily, witches that put curse on people to kill them, or, the Wiccans just aren't viewed that way. They just call her Mother Goddess, which would represent everything that gives life and the same type of view as they viewed in a very high level 10,000 foot view, basic view and thought of the Mother Goddess as they did 5, 6, 7,000 years ago. So it's the same. She gives life to things. The sun god, of course, is where they've got Set, they've got Sol, they've got and the original symbol that, believe it or not, the Catholics used to walk around with when the mushroom heads would take psychedelics, which were the psychedelic mushrooms. That's how the Catholic religion began. That's how Christianity began. Anyone tells you different's a lying asshole, but that's the truth. Is they would take these priests would take these mushrooms and hallucinate and trip their balls off and walk around, and plants would talk to them and the air would talk to them, and it kind of morphed into this. They started to write things down and do things, and it kind of morphed into a religion, and you couldn't tell them any different because they saw it with their own eyes and they heard it with their own ears, even though it was a psychedelic. That is not a witchcraft part of history. That is a cheap, lying, religious part of history, because they don't tell you that. But the entire Christian religion began from Judaism, of course, which was after what the Canaanites believed, and their beliefs in basically elements, which were water and air and a lot of things on what current witches, and many witches, including pagans way back, which a lot of pagans weren't witches. They just worshipped reality. They worshiped nature. This is water. We need it to live. This is food. We need it to live. This is air. They had ceremonies for storms. They would, do these things. Whereas the witchcraft community believed that they could actually control these parts of nature and bring on storms and bring on, through the help of the goddess, kind of summon her, so to speak, when crops weren't being rained on as often as needed, or if they were dying or whatever, then they would try to lull her into, these were the witches that would do this, the priests that would do this. Well, come about, 1567, there was a king who's known as King James the Sixth and King James the First. He actually ruled 3 countries at the same time. In 1567, he ruled Scotland. Well, he wrote a book called Demonology, and in this book, the entire purpose of him writing this book was to, and this is before he was king, he wrote it before he was king, was to write it in a way that all witches, anyone that practices any type of manipulation, worship of the goddess, worship of anything that wasn't the king or a monarch, they were the supreme authority, and then their god. Not, now again, this is after Christianity has begun, this is after Judaism had already begun, this is how things, all of these things had already started to and have been in place, and kings were, way back then, priests in the Catholic Church could get married. So there was no homosexuality in the church, and there was no child raping like there is today. But they could get married to women and have children and be those proper examples to other families. This is how holy and wonderful as a priest my family is. We should do the same, which is exactly how it should go back to and exactly the way it should be. But once we got a homosexual pope in there, and I'm not going to mention in this video who it was, but there have been several, they decided, nope, we're not going to, it's not hard to look up, you can no longer get married. It's blasphemy. You will be celibate your entire life, which is very unnatural, and we can see what happens with celibacy. Child rape, which is quite prevalent, it seems. But anyway, King James. He was king of Scotland, 1567. He took that throne and remained until he became the King of England. Well, he was King James the Sixth as the ruler of Scotland. And then in England and Ireland, in 1603, he became the King James I. He ruled as King James the First then. And he was the first monarch of the English House of Stuarts, which is still to this day, and preceded Elizabeth the very first. He was the son of Mary, the Queen of Scots. That's King James. Just so if anybody in college or anybody that's trying to look at it, that's who he was. This book, Demonology, that he wrote before he was king anywhere, he wrote it with the explicit intent to prove, without the shadow of a doubt, to in anyone's mind that reads this book or listens to him talk about it, that all witches directly took orders from Satan, from the devil. And all witches, no matter how, whether they were healers or no matter what they called themselves or what their skills were, took orders directly from Satan, and that the end result would always be bad. It would always be against mankind. It would always be especially against the crown. Well, since when he became king, he really pushed this writing, and it became very famous all over Europe, all over the Middle East, all over everywhere very quickly. And he made a lot of money, of course. But this general hatred towards witches and witchcraft and this practice became common, very common. And he, to this day, is quoted as murdering more witches, hanging and burning them more than anyone else on any known record anywhere throughout anyone's history. King James did it. So just so that you have an idea on who he is and how that bullshit started. Well, he died in, 1620, or he died in, 1632 maybe. I don't remember the exact year. 1637 maybe he died, somewhere around there. It was an awfully long time ago, hundreds of years ago. Well, then as the monarchs grew and different royalty took over in the same family. Of course, there was also quite a bit of inbreeding in the English monarch side, or the Queen of Scots bloodline. Quite a bit of incest to keep the throne. And that's just not them. It was the same in Scotland. It was the same in Ireland, and then of course the wars and whatever. So. Changed monarchs and new people married and whatever happened, all that stuff. This book, which you may be able to find a copy of, I haven't looked. It's got to be around there somewhere. There's got to be some kind of copy with it. I don't know how, who knows if it's changed or anything. I'm sure it has been in order to suit somebody's need. But this same philosophy was picked up by the Catholic Church, of course, which dominated the English throne. And I know Charles was, the original King Charles was quite adamant with projecting the Catholic Church, and of course realized exactly how much money and the whole scam that whole thing could be, and definitely wanted in because they were very, money equaled power, and there was a lot of land that they wanted. There was a lot of rule that they wanted. So all of those lies and bullshit kind of culminated together, and they, came up with whatever. And Judaism was also a part of that too. It's certainly a part of their history when it comes to the formation of the Catholic Church. Anyway, so it found its way to the American colonies when we came over to murder the Indians and the Mexicans in order to steal this land, when we decided, you know what, I'm tired of this monarch bullshit. And which basically was what it was. I'm tired of being smashed under the Catholics. The new Christian religion formed, the Protestants, which I always called the Protestants because they protested the Catholic Church and all of the little ceremonies that they had to do that basically kept you busy enough so that you couldn't think about how much bullshit it was. And the hatred and that philosophy of demonology followed its way into our 13 colonies. So then you had all the witch trials in Salem that are quite famous and quite popular. You have a lot of that brought its way over. So it is a kind of a cheap connection, what I just did, to bring everything from a little over 4 or 5, almost 6,000 years ago to now. And maybe later on I'll go into specific groups. And then, of course, the explanation of the Egyptians and how they viewed cats as magical and some of the things that they found about the felines. And that's all cats, regardless of size, whether it's tigers or house cats or whatever. House cats and small cats were kept more because, they didn't kill you. But they believed that they did have the power to steal breath and steal your thoughts and actually steal your soul. Some people in Egypt did believe that and would shun cats away. So, where we're at, 25 minutes. That's my deal on the beginning. James the 1st and 6th, who was the most prolific known witch murderer. How people viewed witches. Just doing a little summary here to make sure I didn't forget anything. What the goddess was called, why she was worshipped, different names that she had throughout the ages, and how she is viewed now. Now, I don't know. There may be other witch groups other than Wiccans that excuse me, too, in the same video. Sorry. That also call her, the mother goddess or whatever. It completely depends. You may have your own name for her. It completely depends. This is just through history, true history, and just through what I know, and other things. There's a lot more that I do know, but for this intents and purposes, I'm just going to go through this. So I discussed the one animal, which would be the cat, and different views on what the foundation of the mother goddess and what her authority and what her power was, why she was who she was, and why she was viewed that way as a life giver and taker. Now that's changed into thousands of little sects and changes throughout the ages, but also went over how the Catholic Church started and their view on witchcraft and different things, and how the English monarch took over and pronounced God as the only God, and of course we had all the claimed things with Jesus in this time, and as King of the Jews, and we had all of that injection, along with, as the Catholic Church is and Christianity is being built up, then so is Judaism. They weren't going to be left behind, and of course the Torah and the Talmud, and there's 3 others. I never remember them because if you read them, as Jewish law, they are terrible books. Not terrible in writing, terrible in content. And if you read them, you'll be pretty disgusted. But anyway, there are parts of the Bible that are the same way. So that's my deal. We're almost at 27 minutes. That's fun. And the next video I will pick up and go over a little bit more history and try to fill some more gaps in as far as the prominent figures and significant events that happened. Nobody really cares about the little stuff, right? But I may inject some of that too, and then discuss a new animal that witches used and whatever, and then compare it to how the churches view and whatever, and then we'll go from there. And I will also link it to as things stand now and today in the next video. I don't know how many videos this is going to be, but we'll see. And again, everything I said is 100% true. It's a 10,000-foot view. My apologies to that, but again, I don't want to make a 5-year video. So until the next video, and I look forward to talking about what's next.